Nick Angstadt from Locked On NBA here, joined by David Ramil of also Locked On NBA and the Locked On Heat podcast. David, going into the playoffs, how are you feeling about this Heat team? It's been a crazy up and down season. They made the finals last year, and it feels like they're so far away from it right now.
Well, pretty good actually. They started off pretty badly. They had a few issues with health and safety protocols. Obviously, Jimmy missed a few weeks, and then there was this kind of build up towards the trade deadline, and that kind of fell a little flat because they weren't able to acquire a big name. Victor Oladipo was the biggest target they got, and of course, he only wound up playing 4 games for the team, so it didn't quite work out the way they wanted it to. But they still been playing pretty well over the last half of the season, and especially with Jimmy Butler in the lineup. So right now, I'm actually feeling pretty confident about their first round matchup.
The Miami Heat have been, it seems, all over the place with some of the players. Who's in, who's out? Is Jimmy in? Is Jimmy out? It's such a different team. Who's in the playoff rotation? Let's start there. And then which role players do you think will have to step up the most in that rotation?
Well, unless we get some unforeseen change to the starting lineup, it's been the same lineup over the last couple of weeks. Kendrick Nunn, Duncan Robinson, Jimmy Butler, Trevor Ariza, who they acquired for Myers Leonard in the trade, and of course Bam Adebayo. And then coming off the bench, probably Goran Dragic, Andre Iguodala for his experience, Tyler Herro, and then the recently acquired Dwayne Dedmon has been providing a little size and rebounding that Miami sorely lacked. So that seems to be the 9-man rotation that Spoelstra will be using going forward.
What's this team's biggest strength? I mean, we've seen last season they had a couple of different scorers. They had a pretty good defense in Bam, and this season, again, a little bit all over the place. But what's the biggest strength for this Miami Heat team?
It's Jimmy Butler. I mean, maybe that's a little simplistic, but they win a lot with him there. He's one of the few players in the league that can single-handedly change the course of a game. Obviously, you'll see him, and I've made this point before on the podcast, that every once in a while he just kind of sits back. He's a great playmaker, an underratedly great playmaker. And then there are times there where he just says, oh, you know what? I need to kind of dominate. And then he can slow the game down, get to the free throw line. He averaged over 10 free throw attempts per game last year against the Milwaukee Bucks, so that expects to be a factor moving forward as well. And then he can dominate with his scoring. We see his three-point shooting kind of be a little streaky, but he's certainly capable of hitting it in clutch situations. So I think that's clearly Miami's biggest strength. Aside from that, it's Erik Spoelstra too. His ability to make changes on the fly in games, I think, is second to none, perhaps, around the league. And certainly a huge advantage over over Milwaukee moving forward. Mike Budenholzer, not known for his in-game adjustments. That's probably one of their biggest weaknesses, and so Miami can certainly take advantage of that.
What about Miami's biggest weakness? You said that they were lacking some inside presence, which, Bam Adebayo, not the biggest, but he can definitely defend with some of the best of them. What is their biggest weakness as a team?
Well, Bam isn't always as aggressive as Heat fans would love him to be. There are moments there where they kind of scratch their head and go, you've got a wide open look. Why don't you knock that down? You can do so pretty regularly. Until recently, he wasn't even able to dominate like smaller guys in the low post. He would get like a mismatch there and kind of pass out of a double team or even, again, when he had a mouse in the house. And so it's been a little confusing for Heat fans not to see him kind of take over those kind of moments because we know he's certainly capable. Aside from that, you're kind of relying on journeymen, Trevor Ariza, Dwayne Dedmon, guys that have all of a sudden been required to become huge factors for Miami. That's not exactly an ideal position as you're looking to repeat last year's success. So Goran Dragic is also a problem for Miami fans, I think, because he's a huge X factor in that he was such a huge scoring complement to Jimmy Butler and Bam last year in the playoffs, but he hasn't quite been that over the last few weeks. He's shown some improvement, but overall, I think there's concerns about his age and overall health. So that's something to look out for in the playoffs.
Let's take a look at the win profile for this Miami Heat team. What are some of the biggest wins of the season? And then we can get into some of the worst losses. I mean, I think everyone remembers the huge win over the Boston Celtics where they just kind of like pummeled them on national TV that one day when they were kind of tied there. But what are some of the other biggest wins, or if that's the biggest one?
That might actually be it, because it kind of proved just enough that Miami was capable of distancing themselves from the other teams in that bottom 6 through 8 category there, or 6 through 10 rather. They avoided the play-in altogether. So that was a big thing for them. They also had a big win over the Utah Jazz at home, over the Lakers, albeit without Anthony Davis. So, like so much of this season, it's kind of hard to take any regular season game too seriously because every team has had some issue or missing a key player here and there. But overall, Miami just feels confident. Like even against their current opponent, the Milwaukee Bucks, Jimmy Butler missed all 3 regular season games. So they have no idea what to expect from Jimmy, although, of course, they got a pretty good sampling of what he can do last year in the playoffs. But I think those are the big wins there. And, they've had some rough losses as well. You pointed out that they've had some tough ones, like just games to to below 500 teams like the Washington Wizards, Detroit Pistons, Minnesota Timberwolves, like the bottom dwellers. It seems like Miami always kind of plays to the level of their opponent, which is great because now you're facing quality opponents.
Yeah,
so
right.
you expect the very best of them. But overall, it's just been kind of hard to predict exactly what version of the Heat you'll see on a night-to-night basis.
There's been a lot of teams so far. I've done almost all of these through all the playoffs, and a lot of teams have said that. The Bucks, I just did that video. The Dallas Mavericks obviously played to their opponents. The Hawks have said that. Like, so many teams this season seem to be playing to the level of their opponent. What are the stakes for this team if they don't make it back to the finals, or if they lose in the first round, or what do you think could happen? I don't think Eric Spoelstra's job is at stake or anything like that. I don't know if they can make any big wholesale changes on the roster, but do you see anything happening to this team if they bow out early, or even if they, make another finals run, like something could happen, an extension or whoever?
Not really. It just kind of feels like they're playing with house money. Last year showed that they can be successful. Jimmy has proven to all the naysayers that he's capable of leading a team. Bam continues to make improvements. Everybody on this roster just has already proven something. So it just feels like they're going into this matchup with incredible confidence because they don't have a lot of pressure to prove anybody wrong or anything like that. There's nobody's job is in jeopardy. There's not a lot Victor Oladipo probably had the most at stake, and unfortunately he's not going to be available because of injury because he's entering the free agency. But for everybody else, Jimmy's under contract, Bam's under contract. There's no key player there that is worried about their future or anything like that. So right now, as you said, Eric Spoelstra too, with plenty of job security, there isn't as much at stake there as there are for other teams. They want to knock off a championship. Obviously, they made a promise to Jimmy Butler, so that's probably the biggest pressure that they have is to fulfill the promise they made to him. But other than that, it's not really a lot of pressure, especially not from outside sources. They don't care what anybody thinks. And so that's a huge relief for them moving forward is that they can just kind of concentrate on what they do well and focus on that.
Maybe not a stake or I guess an implication, but what about Tyler Herro going into the playoffs? He was like this breakout star last season, and it seems like he hasn't really followed it up with a season that matched that level of play that he had during the playoffs. What do you think? Could there be reputation at stake, or could he prove everybody right that he was, this great breakout star from last season in these playoffs?
I mean, if he has some great games and a few clutch shooting opportunities, I think that certainly will go a long way towards saying, well, he was able to make some improvements. But you think about his whole career, obviously from the first year to the second year, he had that long hiatus there. But then during this most recent offseason, the shortest offseason of any rookie. So it's not like he had a lot of time to kind of incorporate anything new into his game. So he's taken not necessarily a step back, but he hasn't taken a leap that a lot of people expected, including myself, that he would. So I think for him, if he has a big series or a big playoff run, then maybe he can show that he's a foundational piece moving forward. Otherwise, you could see Pat Riley saying, well, maybe it's time to make some changes. And look, Pat Riley, he'll always trade anybody on this roster for any superstar that becomes available. If there's a chance to acquire Dame Lillard or anybody else, he'll package Tyler Herro away in a heartbeat. You don't have to worry about that. This is the guy who packaged Lamar Odom a year after signing him and say, you know what, Shaquille O'Neal's available, or we're going to go ahead and make that trade anyway. Sorry. Thanks for your time.
I just want everyone to know, if they're listening on the audio version of this, that you rolled your eyes when you said Damian Lillard. I just need everyone to know that. That was all right. Last thing for you. What's the most prevalent national narrative you've heard about the Miami Heat? Maybe about Jimmy Butler, or about Bam, or even Tyler Herro, or somebody like that. Eric Spoelstra, Pat Riley. Something that you've heard that you're like, that's just wrong or misunderstood, or that they got this wrong. The Heat culture seems like the one thing that people keep talking about. Is that all it's cracked up to be? Does anything like that stand up?
No, I mean, that is absolutely true. So I can't dispute that. I mean, they just expect everybody, they hold everybody accountable. That's probably the most simplistic way of saying it. They have a high standard and they make sure you reach it. If it takes body fat tests or making sure that you put in the work, whatever it is, and having a guy like Udonis Haslem on the bench to kind of just say, you know what, this is a place where you need to prove yourself on a nightly basis. That's a big help for anybody who joins the Heat. They know what they expect when they come into it. But I think it's also wanting to disprove the whole fluke talk. I mean, they've been discounted all year long, right? Because they took advantage of the bubble, or they were able to have, I don't know, an unclear advantage over every other team in the Orlando bubble. That just hasn't been the case, really. They're dedicated. They're consumed with winning. They're focused on winning. And so I think they have a good mix of veterans, young players, and of course, great coaching to kind of get them to that next level. So I think the biggest narrative about them is a fluke or anything like that. I mean, you look at the Lakers; they're in the play-in tournament. The Heat, conversely, are not. So, I mean, I know the Western Conference is certainly a lot tougher.
Is a little different there.
Maybe, but at the same time, I mean, like the Lakers weren't considered flukes, right? They won a title, and so it's just kind of weird. Although LeBron gets his fair share of criticism, perhaps, but Miami, I think they want to prove to themselves that they can win at the highest level, and that's what their biggest focus is.
David Ramil of Locked On Heat. Go ahead and go listen to that episode and that podcast 5 days a week covering the Miami Heat all throughout the playoffs and then into the offseason. Thank you so much for joining me, David.
You got it.